Greetings from the Hill of Beans. I'm hand holding today because I've lost my selfie stick. It's fallen out my bag and I think I know where, and I'm never going to find it. It was a week ago or maybe 2, I don't know, when did I last make one of these? You tell me. So it's a weekly update about what I'm reading, what's going on in my reading life, and my favourite place in the world. My arm's getting sore already, I don't know if I can sustain this. What's the answer? Stop and sit down somewhere? I don't have a tripod either, so how's that going to help? Dol door. What a great word that is. I'm listening to The Fellowship of the Ring. I've just switched audiobooks because Spotify is so stingy on what they give you on the free plan. Well, it's not a free plan. What am I talking about? I'm paying a fortune for it. On the family plan, I think it's 21 quid a month. And then they stinge out on, was it 10 hours they give you a month? I mean, how's that useful to anyone? It's really just for trying books, isn't it? So I was listening to the Gollum one, Andy Serkis, and I've switched to Rob Inglis because I found a copy of that particular audiobook in my mum's Audible library. And can I just say, whoever it was that recommended the app for downloading one's Audible library, thank you. I did that and I managed to get my mum's library. My mum died 10 years ago, but she had quite an extensive Audible library, which she and I used to share back in the day. That was our kind of weekly, bi-weekly conversation, because my mum had MS and she was paralysed from the neck down, lived in a wheelchair on her own independently with carers coming in to take care of her several times a day. But when she was on her own, she would listen to audiobooks, so we would have great conversations on the phone and I would log into her computer and help her to download audiobooks. Happy memories. So she had Fellowship of the Ring in her library and I was like, I wonder if she listened to that. I can't ask her. Kind of rubbish. In fact, it's 10 years this year. 10 years in August. Anyway, so she had that and I now have it as well because of this Audible app, whose name I forget, but I'll put a link in the description so you can go and check it out. I'm using a combination of that to download the books and then Plex on a Synology. This is getting a bit geeky. I've got the Plex app, a Plex server on a Synology enclosure, network attached storage I think you would call it, and there's an app called Prologue which I have on my phone, and it's actually better than the Audible app. It's got more features and I like it better. So that's a long story about why I'm listening to Fellowship of the Ring. But see, coming up here, so I've just listened to The Ring Goes South and A Journey in the Dark. I'm not finished A Journey in the Dark, I just paused it to talk on here. But I mean, clearly I'm not in similar scenery to what they are, because they're going through mountain pass on Criatath or something the mountain's called, and the snow's come down and they have to turn back. But nevertheless, it's about stoating about scenery, and that's what I'm doing. I'm stoating about scenery as well, which I love. So see, getting your fantasy on. And speaking of that, I got caught up in a Reddit thread this morning about Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, which is my favourite fantasy series, where the poster was looking for evidence of a quotation that spoke about unbelief and love, and I thought, yeah, this is great. And a guy that I know just from being online, who goes by the name Wayfriend, he seems to be the leading expert on the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, and he found a quote plus another quote, and so I read that and I was like, wow, I would love to read that again. And then I got thinking about YouTube content, and listen to that wee waterfall there. Yeah, making YouTube content, going deep in a book, it doesn't reward the creator, really, in terms of watches and, you know, all the stuff. But I did do a deep dive into Lord Phil's Bane as a podcast. It wasn't as a video, but I did publish it on YouTube as well. And the premise of that was to go through, it's the first book in the first trilogy of Thomas Covenant, and the premise was to go through it with a good friend of mine who'd never read the books, and in fact had never read any fantasy. And I enjoyed it greatly. It was a lot of work, and that's what I'm coming to, is the idea that you put in a lot of work on a project like that. And I mean, the recording bit, the reading bit, that's all fun stuff. The editing bit though, you know, it takes time. And to have it not be watched or listened to or commented upon, but then does that matter? That's the thing. So at the moment, you know, I'm doing a deep dive into Doctor Zhivago, and you know, I'm at the stage now where I'm posting chapter 7 and chapter 8 weekly analysis. So, you know, the only people that are going to be watching that are people who have been with me since the beginning, so they don't get many views, but as a project it's incredibly rewarding, you know, doing a deep dive into a book like that, and then being creative myself, whether that be writing, video. Well, I'm doing both. You know, it's immensely rewarding. And so, as I was walking up here, my favourite place, where I feel at my most creative, I was thinking to myself, why don't I do Thomas Covenant again? Why don't I continue with the second book? And I don't think my pal's really that interested. I don't think he enjoyed. Maybe he did. I shouldn't put words in his mouth, should I? But we did stall on the book one project, and there was quite a few months between, I think it was the penultimate and the final chapters. But we did post eventually the final chapter analysis, and it felt like we'd achieved something, but I just got the feeling that that was the end of the project. So if I were to pick it up again, I suppose the right thing to do would be to ask him first if he's up for it. I don't think he's going to say yes out of politeness. I think our relationship goes beyond that. So do I do that? How do I find the time? Etc, etc. So that's what's on my mind as I walk along this pathway, listening to the Fellowship of the Ring. And we discussed Doctor Zhivago. This morning I spent some time outside on the porch reading a chapter of Lara by Anna Pasternak, who's a relation of Boris Pasternak. And it's a fantastic book. It really is. It covers a lot of the same ground that the Zhivago affair covered. The Zhivago affair was all about how the CIA was involved in getting the novel published in Russian and smuggled into Russia. It was done through the Brussels World Fair in 1958, and it was actually done through the Vatican, would you believe? So the CIA got the book published with the aid of the Dutch secret services, and then the book was distributed by the Vatican at the Brussels World Fair in 1958 to get the book into the hands of Soviet readers, and it was successful. But anyway, that's just the kind of thing I'm reading about. It's while I'm doing my deep dive into the novel to learn all about the author and the history of the book itself, and it's just fascinating. You know, as I say, super rewarding. And then I post it, and no, I wouldn't say no one cares, that's unfair to the people that do care. There are people who are following along, and I'm eternally grateful. I'm hoping that I can grow my channel into a repository of knowledge about Russian classics. And then with fantasy, you know, I think this is I wouldn't say unique crossover point, but it's not so common to have someone reading Russian classics and fantasy. Or is it? I don't know. Maybe it is. Yeah, maybe I'm misspeaking. Maybe there's a big crossover. So yeah, I mean, how would I bring that? That's the thing, now that I'm doing slow reads on my channel so far. I think this is number 6 and they've all been classic Russian literature. How would I bring other genres onto the channel? Well, I would just do it. And people who want to follow it would, and people who don't wouldn't. So that's the thing about niching down and then expectations, isn't it? Your audience comes to expect from you more of what you've already been doing. When, you know, although I do want to do more of that, and I will, I also want to do fantasy. And maybe even literary fiction, I don't know. So, anyway, that's my update. That's all I've been reading this week. Lara and Fellowship and Susan Hill. Susan Hill's memoir, There Is Nothing For You Here, which at this time last week I was really excited about. This week I'm much less so, because she's got to the part in her story where she's working in the Trump White House, and honestly I'm just not that interested. She's going into populism and, you know, she's clearly anti-Trump. You know, I'm not pinning my colours to any mast. It's just to say that what goes on in the background of the White House isn't of great interest to me. So I've put the book onto 2x so that I can get through it for the end of the month. I've invested too much time in it to quit. And I loved the beginning where she was going through her life in the UK in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and then to university, and then, you know, her first journeys into Russia and stuff. That was fascinating. But Trump White House, populism is an interesting topic, and she's comparing the Trump White House to the Putin Kremlin, how populism and how Putin seems to be better at it than Trump is. I don't know. So I'll finish that as well. Yeah, and that's all I've got for my reading at the moment. Speak to you later. Thanks for watching. Bye.